Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Well, Mike, we are on July 8th from Our Generation, and it's good to see you again. It's been a while, man. I think a couple of weeks.
That's right.
Some things have happened since we last sat in these chairs.
Let's go for it.
And Mike, there's something you and I have been talking about is that every year there's a survey done around July 4th on what would be generally described as patriotism. And they don't ask the question using the word patriotism, but they do ask the question, are you proud to be an American? And then the answers can be extremely so, somewhat, not very, not at all. Those are kind of the answers. And so you have, if you're in the top two categories, then you're considered to be proud to be an American. And if you're in the bottom two, then you're not proud to be an American. There's things about America that more things that you dislike than things that you like would be, I guess, the simplest way to explain it. And what I wanted to do is talk about that in two different contexts as well as the issues. And that is, one is by generation, and then one is by political party. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to start with the second one, and that is by political party, because that's the one that I find the most interesting. And what you have is, if you identify as a Republican, then your pride in being an American of either very or somewhat is 92%. It's the highest it's been since they've been taking that survey. If you are an independent, the independents have dropped from down into the 50s, from 76% in 2013 to 53%. If you are a Democrat in 2013, you were 80% proud to be an American. Now you're 36%.
Since 2018.
Since 2013.
Since 2013.
Yes. So in 2013, Barack Obama was president.
Yes.
And if you were a Democrat, you were 80%. 80% of Democrats said they were proud to be an American.
Yeah, that was at the beginning of his second term.
Mm-hmm.
And they had control. I think one observation is say when your side is in power, you tend to be more patriotic and loyal. It's an easy conclusion to make from what we're seeing. But in a decade, from 2013 to 25, in 12 years, just over a decade, mm-hmm. that measure of patriotism has gone, less than half?
Right. Yes. And
almost a third.
I'm just looking to see Republicans in 2013 still had a high propensity to be proud to be an American.
Right.
Even though Barack Obama was president, Republicans were still proud to be an American. And so what I wanted to just explore with you for a little bit is if somebody's proud to be an American, I mean, if a Frenchman says, I'm proud to be French, French has a French culture. What is the American, when somebody's proud to be an American, what are they proud of? What is it to be an American? What makes us different from other countries?
Well, governance is number one. I mean, we were the first country to really overturn the sovereignty of kings and the hierarchical structure of power that had characterized almost every government. I guess you might say every government.
Yeah.
In the history of the world. So we call that democracy for shorthand, although as we've discussed before, we don't really have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic.
Yeah.
But we think of it in terms of the people being in power, and the shorthand for that is democracy.
And how the people who are in power, how they are selected.
Yes, and they're accountable to the people.
And
they're hired by the people.
Yes. And that gets there's so many issues now that are going on as to we hold elections, as Barack Obama did say, and was true, is elections have consequences, and so Trump has now won, and the people who oppose Trump don't seem to accept the idea that elections have consequences. I didn't like Barack Obama's decisions. I didn't like what he stood for, his
policies.
policies,
Right.
and I didn't like some of the bills that were passed. But I recognized that our process gave the people in Congress and the president the authority to pass laws that I didn't like.
Right.
And there was really nothing I could do about that other than wait for the next election.
So you were loyal to the process, the structure of making decisions.
Right.
You were patriotic about that.
Right.
I could extend my answer. I was really pondering this. There's also a cultural component here.
Yes.
I think a lot of people would say they love their country because they love something about its culture. Maybe it's the kind of the freedom of our entertainment culture, our expressive culture, our values
as expressed in the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And this is where I think there's so much disconnect now, is that freedom of speech. There's a movement. There has been a movement for the last 10 to 12 years, frankly, to limit speech.
Yes.
And to call anything that is detrimental, and this is primarily from the left that wants to suppress speech. I'm not saying that the right is not. There aren't some people on the right who would like to control speech, but I'm talking about the
cancel culture mostly comes from the left.
Yes.
Yeah, and so they see things as harmful that they want to stop.
Right.
And so they think that preventing harm justifies restricting speech. That's not a part of the traditional culture in the United States.
And so that is one of the values. Free speech meaning I'll defend to death your right to say whatever you want to,
even if I don't like what you say.
Even if I don't like what you say.
Right.
And so then you have freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is another core value because it's in our First Amendment. And
I see that as sort of shorthand for freedom of conscience, particularly as our culture has more secularized over 200 years. Mm-hmm. You're entitled to your opinion is the shorthand, I would say, for that.
Right.
I believe in that strongly.
But
I'm
not
very
only
loyal to that idea.
But not only, but it also gets into the role of the family and the authority of parents versus the state.
Yes.
As to
that's a constant theme in the controversies we see now.
Yeah, and so and then you have other social issues. Changing, trying to use surgery and hormone pills and chemicals to change a child's gender.
Yes.
That's another issue that they're different sides. They're two different sides to that argument, and but the differences are extreme.
Well, we're approaching this in kind of a rational way. I'm inclined to comment that in the Civil War, people say that was about slavery. It was over a principle, and that's
Mm-hmm.
one way of framing it. But for a lot of people, it was personal. It was, I'm defending my homeland in the South.
Yes.
We're both from the South.
Okay.
The South was on the wrong side of the principle there.
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody was fighting to uphold slavery. Some were, most were probably, because that was their way of life, and they didn't want somebody else coming in and changing their way of life. But one level of seeing that is that their homeland was being invaded.
Right.
And they were going to defend their homeland and their prerogatives to run life as they had seen it.
Right.
That way was wrong, and it's good that it's gone.
Right.
Okay. But there's a personal part of it. And then when we talk about love of country, I think, land where my fathers died, that's kind of personal. I belong here. I was born here. My genes arise from this land, this soil.
Right.
And there's a level of pride in that, of belonging, I think, that's threatened when this patriotism, this loyalty that you describe declines.
Right. And so when people are asked, this is what we're getting into, when people are asked, are you proud to be an American? And it begs the question, what is it to be an American? And we're trying to discuss that in the terms of what is really articulated in our Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. And I suppose you could also then include the remaining amendments to the Constitution, because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And so, that should be kind of the guiding. The guiding. If you want to change something fundamentally, then you would need to go through the process of amending the Constitution, not ignoring the Constitution, I guess would be the way of saying it.
I think there's also a negative side of patriotism we might touch on, because it can be jingoistic.
Yep.
My way or the highway, love it or leave it. There was a guy in the 1700s in England, Samuel Johnson, who said patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. And I think he was criticizing somebody who was using patriotism to cover up his extremism, something like that. There are excesses of patriotism where you're not reasonably questioning and challenging the way things are. And I think it would be really bad to live in a country where you have state TV, like Russia and Iran come to mind.
Sure.
Where you just get the party line. And
right.
It's cannot be challenged, and that's horrible.
Right. And then the other aspect that I wanted to discuss on this question is and we can put a chart up here, and it's the generations. So if we start with the far left, which is the generation, I think you're in it, but I'm certainly in it.
Yeah.
The baby boom generation.
Yeah.
And the Gen Xers and the millennials and the Gen Zs. Those are the four generations that are represented now by our adult population.
Yeah, you do have really old people that are from the prior, what they call the silent generation or the greatest generation, basically the World War II and Depression babies.
Okay, and they're the ones over 80.
Yes.
And they're the ones who are over 80, and they're still a large number.
Yeah, my mom's 92, so there's still a reasonable number. But politically, they probably vote in high numbers, I guess. But politically now, and especially what's coming, is shaped by these four.
And they would align, and that generation, what we're describing as, that's not shown here, the silent generation, would be aligned among these most with the baby boom generation. Politically.
Yes,
I'm saying that on this question of patriotism, what we find is that the baby boomers of these four are the ones who are most proud to be an American, and followed by Gen X, followed by millennials, and then in last place on that question.
So it keeps declining in steps with each new generation.
Yeah.
I think it's worth observing that the silent generation, the greatest generation, is basically known for winning World War II.
Yes.
And coming out of the Depression. Those two things are related.
Mm-hmm.
But the baby boomers are the echoes. When the warriors came home, they wanted to start families. The United States was on top of the world because their international competitors have been crushed. Japan and Germany specifically, and England, and their industrial bases. So you had a lot of prosperity and a lot of pride that America had done something good in the world.
Right, and that was the children of the greatest generation.
The baby boomers are,
the baby boomers were the children of that generation.
Yes.
And then you had the Gen X and millennials. But here's what's interesting to me. The baby boomers, by definition, that generation has been around for over 40 years.
Yes.
Okay, it's been around actually over 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the rate of change of the pride in America by baby boomers has been relatively small over that entire period of time. The Gen Z, for example, the Gen Z 10 years ago wasn't the same population. 10 years ago, the Gen Zs were 10 years younger than they are now.
Yeah, they weren't politically mature. They were still children or teenagers.
Right. And so what I'm saying is that the baby boomers are, quote, a more mature generation in the sense that they're older. So they've been the baby boomers at one point were a Gen Z. They were in their 20s.
Sure. And it'd probably be for another occasion interesting to look at what the baby boomers thought when they were a similar age. Churchill said, if you're not a socialist when you're young, you're insensitive. And if you're not a capitalist when you're old, you're stupid.
Yeah.
Different words, but basically that was
something along those lines. Yeah.
So, but I think the point you're trying to make and have made is that this poll, which I think is the Gallup poll, it's very old, right? They ask the same question over decades. Is it Gallup?
So I don't know if it's Gallup, but it is, and there might be two or three who do this.
Okay.
But the questions are the same every year.
For a long time.
For a long time.
And the answers were somewhat stable up until about 2015.
Correct.
So about 10 years ago, the cliff came on, and we see this decline.
Yes.
And so our question for today is why, and what does it mean?
Yes. So I am interested, Mike, in because the decline has been most extreme, not just by age group, but also by political party, including independents.
Right.
So only the self-identified Republicans have a high level of "I'm proud to be American." What does that mean? What does it mean that independents have dropped down to from in the 70s 10 years ago to in the 50s now, and then the Democrats have fallen from 80 to 36?
Well, one thing that occurs to me right off the bat is that polarization has pushed us into parties that almost reflexively disagree with something the other side does.
Yep.
And "Proud to be an American" is a song that is strongly associated with the right. Lee Greenwood used to be my neighbor here in Nashville, wrote that song. And it's a very Republican song. You would never hear it at a Democratic.
That's interesting, because you're right. It is a song that is sung at almost every Republican national convention.
Yeah.
And I don't believe, and I could very well be wrong, but I don't believe I can remember it being sung at a Democrat convention.
No, because it's associated with the right.
Okay.
And so the left would respond to this as jingoistic, as naive patriotism, as not serious criticism of how to make the country better, right? And you have MAGA, Make America Great Again. That's explicitly nationalistic.
Yes.
Right? Almost jingoistic, and the left hates it.
Well, and nationalistic in the sense of Trump makes it explicitly clear that everything I do is going to be designed. His goal is to benefit the American citizens.
Yes.
Benefit Americans who are citizens.
And the opposition to that is we're citizens of the world, and everybody ought to be treated equally. And in its extreme form, we ought not to have borders.
Yes. Yeah. And so I want to try to bring into this how the media may or may not have affected this change in patriotism, and so when because we off mic in between the last session, this one, we've kind of talked about media branding, and my sense of it is that every major media outlet now, whether it's on television or whether it is in print, has more or less has picked a side, and so its editorial positioning, both in the news and in its opinion, is covers one side or the other.
Yes, and I think it's always been that way. You know, you want any side represented, and with a culture that has free speech, obviously you need different sides vying with one another. I asked a business school professor one time about law. Why do we have opposing counsel making cartoons of the other side? And he said, because the alternative is an inquisition.
Right.
You get one point of view and vetting all the other points of view.
Yeah.
You obviously don't want that. So it's very healthy to have this dichotomy, this ongoing debate. It's turned into stridency that is so reflexively rejecting of the other side.
Right.
That we don't even really listen to each other. We just listen to what the other guy says and then oppose it.
Well, I'm not even sure that we now listen to what the other guy says. I get my news from about 8 or 9 different sources, but they all express a point of view that I more likely than not agree with.
Yes.
Now, but that's also is because in my case, I believe that when you look at, I try to be a student of history. In fact, the Giants of Political Thought is about the history of ideas, going back as many as 400 or 500 years.
Yes.
I think Machiavelli is the oldest one. So if people are interested in history and understanding the history of ideas, if they would go to giantsofpoliticalthought.com, they can see the list of thinkers that we cover.
Yeah, well, this is the work that brought us together. You hired me to start that business, and here we are decades later.
So what I've done is I've looked at, for example, I went back and I've looked at the history of the stock market. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed was in the 1930s, the stock market did not perform well over a period of about 11 years. And so I asked myself, okay, well, what happened during that 11 years that would have caused the stock market to not perform well that long? I mean, certainly there are times when the stock market goes down, but an 11-year period of not performing is significant. And what I noticed was that top marginal tax rate at the beginning of that period was 25%. And at the end of that period, it was 94%. The top marginal tax rate was 94% as we got into the Second World War, and that it was only after the Second World War when the other industrial bases of the world, that the stock market began to recover. And so I asked myself, I said, well, why would? So I said, well, is higher taxes good or bad for the economy? So then I go and look at some of the data during the Depression, unemployment rates, inflation, the various things that would indicate whether or not the economy is doing well. And then I looked at in the 60s and 70s, and we had the terrible inflation in the late 70s and 80 and 81, and the stock market once again performed terribly for about a 10-year period. And so I tried to discover.
The correlation you found is what?
I found the correlation was that the higher the tax rates are, not the deficit spending per se, but the higher the tax rates were, and the increase in the spending of the federal government. Those two things in combination produced higher unemployment, produced lower rises in income, and produced a stagnant at best value of assets. But whether it was stocks or homes, it didn't matter. Whatever the assets were, the values. And so I concluded from that is that if prosperity for as many people as possible is the goal, then those policies would not bring about the goal, would not achieve the goal.
So this is an immediately relevant topic since it's only been less than a week since the One Big Beautiful Bill was passed.
Yes.
And one of the central tenets of that was whether we were going to retain a tax cut from 2017 or let policy go back to where it was before that, which would, compared to current circumstances, be a big tax increase.
It would be a substantial tax increase.
It would burden the economy. I think,
in our opinion, it would burden the economy.
Well, that's been a consistent theme throughout what we've said, here, that higher costs reduce standards of living. And so I think one of the reasons Republicans really like this bill is they think it's going to unleash economic growth.
Right.
The left doesn't think so, and we'll know by the time the midterm elections come along what kind of effects. We'll have some ideas about what kind of effects this has. But to me, that question is about the size of government.
Yes.
I think the government is too big. It's good to keep the lower taxes and try to grow our way out of this hole we're in.
Right. So kind of the thing that I've observed over time is that Adam Smith talked about the invisible hand, and so you have kind of 2 points of view. One is the free market allows for individuals and capital to flow to where they think they can get the highest return.
Yes.
And doing that in order to get the high return, you're meeting an unmet demand. And that's what if there's a demand out there that's not being met or not even known, and you meet that demand, then you're going to make a profit. And then if you make substantial profits, then other people are going to see that there's a lot of profit to be made doing that, and so they will join in and they will compete.
Yes.
And that's the nature of the markets. But the other side of the equation is, well, free markets cause a lot of dislocation and hurt people.
So you mean the other opinion, the contrasting opinion?
Yes, is that free markets can be harmful, and they can.
Yeah.
Because they're dynamic in nature, and so therefore the other side says we need government to keep the free market from hurting people, and so we need free markets to we need free market. We don't
provide
need free
health
markets
care, to provide housing,
we
provide
need government.
food.
We need government to be responsible for those things, and so that kind of gets us into, we may be jumping. You may want to say I don't want to go there yet, and it's fine. And that is the rise of the Zohran Mamdani for the mayor of New York, who has himself said the end goal is for the government to control the means of production. Well, that is a quote from Marx.
Yes. So since we were together last time, he has won the Democratic primary for a mayor of New York. He defeated Andrew Cuomo, who had been governor of New York before. That's a pretty big deal.
Yes.
To knock off somebody like that. This guy's relatively unknown, and he is an unabashed socialist.
Well, he also, if you take him at his word, where the end goal is that the government should control the means of production, he is a Marxist. I'm not going to call him a communist. I'm going to call him a Marxist.
Okay.
And so that's an ideology. And so what he says he's going to do if elected, he says he's going to have the city take over the grocery stores. He says he's going to give people free, I think it's free childcare. He's going to give them free bus rides. He's going to control rents. And so these are things that he says he's going to do. And so for me,
Joe Biden was controlling rents during COVID. He passed a rule that people can't raise rents. You remember that? And then New York has been controlling rents for a long time. The question that's swirling in my mind is, do we perceive these things as un-American? During the 50s, people would say, the communist scare, McCarthy was saying this, that's un-American, and it has to be expelled, has to be rejected, quashed.
Right.
Right? Do those kind of ideas and policies have a role in the United States? And I would say in a country with free speech, they get to have their say. And if they prevail into law, then so be it.
Yes.
And that's what's happening in New York.
And that's what's happening in New York. Now, what's also interesting is you look at New York over time. New York elected David Dinkins to be the mayor back in the 80s. And in fact, it was even before that I don't remember who the mayor was when Jerry Ford, the president of the United States, essentially said, "You're on your own." They appealed to the federal government to bail them out.
Yeah, so their finances were so bad they thought they couldn't dig out. They asked the federal government to bail them out. Ford said no, and the famous headline in the New York papers were "Ford to New York, drop dead."
Right. That was New York Times, exactly right. And so then the government.
I don't think it was the Times. I think it was maybe one of the other papers, more tabloid-like papers. Would say something like that. I'd be surprised if it was the Times.
Okay, all right.
That was the reaction to it.
Yeah, and so then New York at that point, then it had to figure out, and the state of New York, the combination of the two, had to figure out how to make reforms to survive as an entity because a state cannot bankrupt legally, but a city can.
So, we're talking about history here from the 80s to young people. That may sound like ancient, prehistoric information.
Matters.
It's going to happen again here.
Yes.
It's going to happen in Chicago. It's probably going to happen in Los Angeles. It may happen in New York again. The way these cities are governed, they are digging a hole, particularly Chicago, I think. It astounds me how badly governed that place is. And they're going to come for a bailout to expect you and me and our listeners to pay for the sins of their past.
Well, so at any rate, focusing, because Brandon Johnson, his approval rating, mayor of Chicago, his approval rating, my understanding right now, stands around 10%.
Yeah,
but yet he is still able to push forward his agenda.
Well, they're still increasing pensions, that they can't afford.
Yeah, so it's really quite something, and that's the way that's the way our system works.
It's the way the market works. You bankrupt, and so all the obligations that are built up go away.
Yes. Well, that's in
the private sector.
Yeah. Detroit did bankrupt, and it was able to reorganize under bankruptcy. There have been other cities that have bankrupted, and maybe Detroit didn't bankrupt, but it got into court or whatever. But they managed to fix their pensions because they had gotten to the point where paying the pensions was 2/3 of the city revenue.
Well, I think this Illinois Constitution makes pensions sacrosanct. They cannot be impinged.
Okay.
And so you tax whatever you have to do to make those, and that'll be a big legal battle coming in the next decade or two, I think.
Okay.
What's going to happen to those obligations? All the firefighters and policemen and teachers, people that have worked in the public sector and have been promised a certain standard of living, which is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly around Chicago, but these are people making six-figure incomes on a pension. How do you pay for that without killing the goose that's paying the taxes?
Right. And but so
to mix a metaphor.
Yeah. Goose paying taxes. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
But Mamdani is even more extreme than Brandon Johnson was as a candidate.
Yes.
And Mamdani. I struggle with his name, but he's 33 years old. It's really quite interesting because the budget, I think you looked it up before we started the show, the annual budget of New York City is $115 billion.
Yes.
That's
something around there. Yeah,
that's
I think
a large
for 2024, 25.
That's a large number. And Mamdani he is wholly unaccomplished. in terms of there's nothing on his resume that says that he has the history that shows he can manage an enterprise that big. Not even close.
Yes.
But yet his appeal looks to me like he's going to win.
So he said that he's going to build 200,000 housing units, I believe you have said.
Yes.
And we were sketching out the size of that before the show started and came up with a number like 140 billion. I think that was assuming a 700,000 per unit, which is what it had cost in California in a similar situation.
Mm-hmm. New York is a very expensive city to do construction, just very expensive. And the budget right now is $115 billion, and 100% of that money is spent every year. So it's not like there's a piece of the $115 billion.
So we think there's not we know there's not a surplus, or we're pretty sure there's not a surplus. We think there's not much of a deficit. So they're raising about $115 billion and spending about $115 billion. He wants to double the spending. Yes. Where's the money going to come from?
Right. Well, he's not necessarily going to double it all at once because the $140 billion would be over a long period of time. But it still would be a $15 to $20 billion per year increase.
Mm-hmm.
Where would that come from? And Mamdani's answer is it's going to come from higher taxes. But New York City is already the highest tax city in the country. And so then the question becomes, well, if you start chasing people out of New York who are the ones who are paying the highest taxes, what do you do to replace that revenue?
You know, I think they've started a new stock exchange in Dallas to compete with the New York Stock Exchange because there's so much regulation and there's constant political attacks on the wealthy in New York. I think Dallas would stand to gain a lot from this change.
Yes. Well, and there'll be other cities. We're here in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And Tennessee is already in a trap because Tennessee has no taxes on any form of personal income, whether it's income, interest, dividends, capital gains, or estate. We have no taxes on those. We are attracting people from the higher taxed regions of the country, like California, Chicago.
Yeah, we see it every day when we walk outside the building here.
Yeah.
So we'll benefit, but Florida will benefit, Texas, low tax states will benefit. And where do you go? You know, when you have a downward spiral, you have more expenses, you try to raise taxes, and that chases people away, you have less money.
And
it's a death spiral.
Then you have to raise taxes again.
Yeah, on what's left.
Those who remain.
Yeah.
And so the election of if Mamdani is elected, it'll be an interesting experiment because it'll be one city, very large city, but we here in Tennessee will be more or less unaffected from a negative standpoint and may actually be affected in a positive way. That also gets into how our country is organized.
Mm-hmm.
In that we have 50 states who compete with each other, and by having competition among the states, you can have different ideas in play at the same time, which then
somebody called it a laboratory of democracy, which basically is a great point. You test it out, and if it works, people will come there, or other people will adopt those patterns.
Right, and so the patriotism issue is interesting to me from the standpoint of the dramatic shift in that and what that means. And I can't give you an answer on what it means.
Among younger generations.
Younger generation and political party. It's a combination of the two.
Yes.
But the other thing that's interesting to me in New York in particular is that New York is probably the most culturally diverse city in the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
It has people from every culture, and I don't mean a small number. I mean a large number.
I think I read that there are 200 languages spoken in New York.
Wow. Okay, and so that will itself is kind of an experiment in what you would call extreme multiculturalism and what that means politically.
Yes,
and because cultures. The definition of a culture is determined by the values that the people in that culture share. Now, you've also got customs, but the culture itself is determined by the values that a particular group of people share.
Right.
That's what a culture is. So now in New York, you've got, we've discussed this before, there's 7 major cultures in the world. All 7 of those cultures now are present in New York City.
So when you reduce it to 7, what I hear you is kind of alluding to Samuel Huntington whose work, The Clash of Civilizations, was saying that the future of conflict is not so much at a state level, it is between civilizations. And those are, Western European, China, India.
Yeah, it's more the Hindu. It's not India, it's Hindu. Yeah, it's Hindu.
Which would include some of Pakistan.
Well, Buddhism, Confucianism.
Right, that's one.
Taoism is Japan.
That's two.
Okay, and Hinduism, and then Islam.
Yeah.
Russian Orthodoxy.
Okay.
Western civilization, and then tribal. And the tribal is the historically the continent of Africa and South America.
Okay.
Where those cultures were tribal in nature.
Right.
And so what you now have is in New York, you have now I think 9% of the population of New York is Muslim. So that's a culture. You have a significant number of Indians. So Hindu has a large culture representation in New York. The European population is now about 30% of New York, which is among cities. That's a pretty small percentage. So
it started as New Amsterdam, which is Dutch, right? Then it was New York, which is English. So its history is very Western European. Your point now is that it's down from around 100% to 30% represented.
Yeah, and that 30% is not necessarily monolithic, because part of Western culture is we have difference of opinions.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you have a significant number of people who live in New York who are from South America or Africa. So you have the tribal context. Then you have Russian Orthodoxy.
So the question is, how does this elaborate mix end up in political outcomes, such as Mamdani winning a primary in a place where that's kind of equivalent to the election, because the Republicans are so weak they never win in New York City.
Right.
And so I think it's fair to say this may never happen, okay? Now, let's debate this a little bit. There's some people that say that he's a shoo-in, that Adams, the current mayor, running as an independent, really cannot overcome this. Cuomo can't run as an independent, overcome it. He's going to be the next mayor.
Yeah.
We'll see whether that's right or not. But I have in mind, Bernie Sanders had a similar kind of agenda until James Clyburn, I think is he a senator or a representative?
He's a representative of South Carolina.
Yeah, he kind of stepped in when Biden was running. He was losing. He had lost his first primaries, and Clyburn stepped in and made sure he's so influential in South Carolina. He put Biden in a position to win, and he did, and he kind of overtook Bernie. Mm-hmm. So we still have a lot of Bernie's policies, or had them, in Biden's administration. That was sort of the price of getting him elected. It's sort of like when FDR was running, he had to get rid of Huey Long, who was challenging from the left in Louisiana, and Social Security and a lot of things came out of this more socialized attitude about responding to the distress of the 30s. Right. So my point is, these leftist challenges to the typical capitalistic American way are not new. They have a way of being undermined and replaced. So you might make the case that he may get elected but not be allowed to do what he wants to do. But I know there's a lot of people on the left that are very concerned about this, because this is dragging them further away from the center of the political spectrum. And it may have national effects if they're identified as this the kind of policies they're trying to push us toward.
Well, the things that I am reading is that Mamdani is likely to be the next mayor. So, and as you point out, well, until the election is held, until the general election is held, we won't know.
Right. And is the council going to go along with him? Is he going to actually be able to implement these things?
The city council of New York is like the city council of Chicago. It is very, very far left. And so what I'm suggesting is that I do believe that Mamdani will win. I do believe that he will then attempt to implement what he promises, and I think that'll then be, as we describe it, kind of a laboratory. We can observe the effects of Mamdani's policies. Now, it could be that he doesn't win. It won't be Cuomo. It would be Eric Adams would be the alternative. And I just don't sense that he will prevail. And so And what I'm saying is, though, Mike, is that New York has a different culture than the country as a whole.
Yes.
And so Bernie Sanders was parked by the Democrat Party, spearheaded by James Clyburn in South Carolina. But make no mistake, the Democrat Party told Bernie, "You're not going to be our nominee."
Yeah.
And so he then backed out. He backed down, and they made promises to him that they would still enact many of the things that he wanted, and the Biden people then proceeded to do that. Mamdani, on the other hand, is running in a city that is very, very far left itself, a very, very heavily Democrat, and but to me, what's interesting is it's so culturally diverse, and that's what's going to be interesting to me is to observe what happens, because economic reality, it doesn't matter what culture you're in. Nobody, regardless of the culture, wants to pay super high taxes on the next dollar of income. Nobody wants to do that. And if the government imposes its will on an industry like the grocery store industry, then the question is, how does that affect if the state tries to run grocery stores? What will that look like? Now, Mamdani says that grocery stores make too much money, which indicates to me that he has no idea how much money a grocery store actually makes. Yeah. Because the answer is a really, really well-run grocery store, out of every dollar of sales, makes a bottom line profit of about 2 cents.
Yes.
A well-run one. And so if Mamdani thinks that it goes, because if you own a grocery store, you're working very hard to make sure that your fresh produce sells before it spoils. If you're a city employee, do you care? And the answer is no, because it's no skin off your back if you have to throw away fresh produce. And in fact, the people who supply the grocery stores with fresh produce would probably like that.
Because then they sell the replacement.
They get to sell the replacement. It'll be interesting. So what we're trying to cover here, in a little bit of a disjointed way, but it's interesting, is this question of patriotism and what it means, because the Republican Party, members of the Republican Party, right now are riding high, and Trump's big beautiful bill passed, and in that bill was virtually every major domestic promise that he made during the campaign was included in that big beautiful bill, and not a single Democrat in either the House or the Senate voted for it. And so now you have a clear one party says this big beautiful bill will lead to greater prosperity for the largest number of people possible,
right? And
the Democrat Party says no, it won't. Now, what's going to be interesting is how the people because I think the bill says that it is effective January 20th. Okay, so in other words,
2026,
2025.
So it's retroactive.
Retroactive. So no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime. To the extent that that's been taken out of your pay, you're going to get it back. Mm. So if you've been working on tips, so Mike, I don't know the answer to these questions, and you may want to guess, or you may want to say, well, you actually know, but I don't know how many people where tips are a major part of their income. I'm guessing it's somewhere around 4 or 5 million people where tips are a major part of their income. And then I'm guessing that the number of people who work for and where overtime is a pretty significant part of their income is somewhere around 5-6 million people. I'm just
guessing.
Just guessing. But those two groups do not overlap. They don't overlap at all. Then how many people on Social Security will now benefit from no taxes on Social Security for people with incomes below a pretty significant number? I think that number is closer to 20 to 25 million.
Well, the next question is, how does that affect the voting patterns in the midterm elections?
In the midterm elections. And I don't know the answer to that, but if the old saying is people vote their pocketbooks. And so you've now got about 50 million people in total who are going to benefit from the specific legislation, tax exemptions or tax deductions. Yeah. If you buy a new car that's made in America, that's a $10,000. You can write off take a $10,000 deduction.
This is what's driving the deficit higher in this bill. That's the complaint from the left, is it's spending a bunch of money we don't have. Elon Musk is starting a new party because he's so disgusted by this blowout deficit spending. And
that's the claim.
That's the claim. And my view, and I think yours is, there's no way out of this except to grow the economy. You can't raise we need to get a bigger economy.
Well, you've got two things. One is that, which is clear, and the other is that Trump is imposing tariffs. Tariffs are not included in the bill at all.
Right.
But they are. They exist. And
they're happening. You said they are, meaning they're happening.
They're happening.
Yeah.
But the CBO and the Congress did not include tariffs in the calculation.
Right.
Of when calculating revenue, tariffs was not a line item.
And they're also not allowed to do dynamic scoring, which tries to estimate the growth effects of a policy. They just look at the dead calculation. If things continue as they are, how do things shift around? I think you and I both know this is very stimulative, and we're expecting the economy to grow. The numbers, projections of deficits don't account for that.
Right, and that's what you and I believe.
Yeah.
And so time will tell. But what's also interesting is the way that Washington accounts for things. So in Washington, if they say it's going to cost $500 billion, okay, most people think, if just armchair, somebody who's not really aware of what that means might think that's $500 billion a year. It's not. It's $500 billion over 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when they're also significant in the sense of a historical, they're also significant spending cuts that are in the bill.
Right.
And that's part of what the Democrats are yelling and screaming about.
Well, the left sees it as dismantling the American dream, which is supported by this public infrastructure and safety net, and people are entitled their way into well-being.
Right. So some of the things that are in the bill are that if you're an illegal immigrant, then you cannot get government health care assistance.
Right.
At the federal, you can't get federal money. You can get state money, but you can't get federal money.
Mm-hmm.
If you are an able-bodied American and you're capable of working, then you have to work 20 hours a week.
Or you don't get Medicaid.
And so there are different things. Yeah. And by the way, Clinton signed a similar law in 1970
for welfare from the 90s.
For welfare reform.
He was elected in 88, I think. So
no, he was elected in 92.
Okay,
and then he
90s.
Signed that right before the 96
election.
Okay. And that, by the way, helped lead to he rejected it twice. He signed it on the third time that it passed Congress.
Yeah.
And it led to the balanced budget that he had for 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
And in his second term. And so
so we heard the same kind of screams then. The people are going to die. They're going to starve to death if they can't get welfare without working.
Yeah, but I read an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal, and it had a map of the country. And that map, there were 2 maps, and the maps were showing which states would get hit the hardest by the changes in Medicaid.
Okay.
Do you know which state in the country would get hit the least because it didn't sign on to any of the Obamacare programs where a state could choose to sign on or not?
Well, I know Tennessee didn't sign on, so is that it?
Yes. Tennessee will be impacted by the people of Tennessee will be impacted by these changes in Medicaid. Almost none. The color it had a faint color above white, and then the deepest blue was the states that were going to be impacted the most. And so what's interesting to me is I ask myself, well, how are people in Tennessee? How are we handling the fact that we don't have a bunch of federal largesse coming into our state paying for health care? And the answer is, I think we're doing pretty well here in Tennessee.
I haven't seen people starving.
Right. And there's not even a whole bunch of stories on the news about people who can't get health care.
Right.
And so it's going to be interesting to me to see what the actual play out is, but that'll be over a period of years, but the midterm election will be mostly about the economy.
Can we talk about perception for a minute?
Yes, please.
Because patriotism, this question about how much do you love your country, it's very subjective. Mm-hmm. It's about an opinion, an attitude, right? And so they're measuring soft things. And so the question is, how do our perceptions develop? How are they shaped? Mm-hmm. And part of what we've talked about before this discussion is the role of the media in doing that. You know, I think it's fair to say some people I've heard say this the United States is as powerful and prosperous as it's ever been, and has a bright future to get even better. Okay, make America great again, and all that kind of stuff. We've just prevailed profoundly on the international stage with very little expense or commitment with what's gone on in Iran. You know, Israel has done most of the work, but the Middle East is being reshaped. There's a lot of possibility for hope, I suppose, and a lot of 2,000 years worth of disappointment there. But still, things are on the move there. They could get better. You may have expansion of the Abraham Accords. The United States is leading that. There's a case to be made that the United States is as prosperous and as what's the word we used in the past podcast? It was prominent or prevailing.
Okay,
I'll come up with it. I'll think about it in the middle of another sentence. But the United States is strong. On the other hand, you listen to some people, and we are just about to devolve into Nazi Germany. Trump is laying the groundwork for taking power and never running for election again. And this is the apocalyptic cartoon that some offer to us as what's really going on. So these perceptions are incompatible. How are they shaped? And I think one answer is media. How are you getting your stories, your information about what's going on? And one of the things that's happening is that we had mass media as I was growing up, as the greatest generation. They had TV stations and radio stations, right? There were only a few TV stations.
There were three: ABC, NBC, and CBS. And then later you had cable and you had Fox. And Fox was like ABC, NBC, and CBS. In other words, it was a broadcast.
It was like a fourth of the major channels. But, you know, you have 200 channels on cable. Now with streaming, you have, I don't know how you count.
It's infinite.
And so a lot of the younger generations that are less and less impressed with the United States are getting their information from these new sources. We can also say Kennedy was the first TV president. Right? That he was widely understood to prevail because he was charismatic, he was good looking, he was articulate. Nixon was neither of those things, and Kennedy won. So then you had the internet come along, and Obama was very good at using the internet to raise money. So he was like the internet president. So you can classify political candidates by the communications technologies that they use to get their message out.
But the one thing that's interesting to me, and this was a new bit of information for me, is I spend time with my grandchildren who are age 17 to 22, and I asked them over the 4th of July, I asked them, I said, how do you get your news? And each one of them gave me exactly the same answer. Well, I get it from social media. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, we get a news feed. I said, well, how does that work? And he said, well, I have, when I'm on my phone, I get an automatic news feed that is about stories that I have shown an interest in the past. And so two of the three said algorithms determine what news I see. And so it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak, that if I'm looking at the same types of stories, if I click on them and read more, and I do that regularly, then the algorithm is going to feed me more stories on that very same topic.
And why do they do that?
Well, I think they do that because they want to keep your attention. And they want you to then look at their advertising.
Exactly.
But they also are trying to give you, they think they're giving you what you want. They're not giving you something you're not interested in. They're curating the news for you.
Yeah, but they're giving you what you want because they want you to stay engaged. Your first point was the major point. The more you stay engaged, the more they have an opportunity to sell you stuff and they make money. So everything, it's like the theaters are about butts in seats. You know, the internet is about eyeballs. The more eyeballs you have engaged, the more prosperous your business is. So they keep you, whatever is most addictive or compelling, they keep feeding it to you, and it tends to be self-reinforcing then.
And now, the difference between my grandchildren and me is I determine where I want to go to see if there are articles that are interesting to me. That's not what the younger generation, we pointed out here, it's not what Gen Z is fed news. My granddaughter said that when there were all these instances where college girls were being either abused or raped or murdered, she would read those stories. And she said that then every story that was about that subject, she would be her news feed would be almost exclusively stories about that.
Well,
that would be very depressing. And she's tried to she's had to consciously try to get away from that because that's not the only thing she cares about. But the algorithm thought that is the only thing she cares about, so they're going to feed it to her.
Right.
And I think that has a lot to do with why our country intellectually is separating so much. Now that still doesn't change fundamental principles. Just because I believe that the government can run grocery stores more effectively than the private sector doesn't mean it can. But if I believe it does, then I'm going to vote for somebody who says that. And then my personal experience might prove me wrong.
Yeah, well, you're back to subjective and objective truth, right?
Exactly.
As I've heard it said, it doesn't matter what you think, sand is not nutritious.
Okay. I like that. Yeah.
So, we struggle to find objectivity in all of this. What are reliable principles? And in politics, it's really hard.
Yeah. And in economics, it's not easy.
Right.
I mean, personally, you feel the effect. And I think the younger generation, Mike, I want to add something. So why the younger generation especially might not feel patriotic, and that is they're saddled with huge amounts of student debt. Mm-hmm. And that's new. That generation is the first generation to be saddled with huge amounts of student debt. So, well, why is that? And that's an interesting discussion. And then they're also saddled with very high insurance premiums because it's
health
insurance premiums that if they're not working for somebody that provides a large percentage of their health insurance, then they are forced to pay premiums that are significantly higher than what they would have to pay if it was based on their actual health.
So just to put a finer point in that, if they don't have a corporate job and W-2 employment where you get a paycheck every week or 2 weeks
right,
that has it deducted, if you're in the gig economy, you're having to find a way to pay for this yourself.
Or if you work for a small business and you have a family, generally the small business will pay for a reasonable percentage of the health care for the employee, but not the family.
Right.
And so there are a lot of people where the husband or wife has a job that pays 80% of their insurance, but then the family plan costs $1,500 to $2,000 a month.
Yes.
Which comes out of the paycheck.
So you have young people saying, this system is not working for me. It's too expensive.
Yes.
To get health care, to educate my children, to get housing. My daughter and her husband are now looking for a house.
Yeah.
And, they have the money to buy a nice house. Fortunately, they're two professionals with good incomes. They don't have kids yet, and so they're okay. But somebody that doesn't have two professional incomes cannot get into the housing market.
Right.
They rent.
And so if they believe that they're angry about their circumstance, which is certainly a reason because they were made kind of a promise. Well, you can borrow money to go to college, and then you'll get a really good job, and you'll be able to pay off the debt.
Right.
Well, a lot of them are just saying, I'm not going to pay off the debt. But guess what? That's the only debt that you can't bankrupt.
Right.
And so it's going to hang with you for decades. And that is a burden because it's after tax, by the way. When you pay it off with after-tax money.
Right.
And so here you are having your insurance taken out, and that's after tax. For health insurance, you have to make student loan payments. You have a high cost of finding a place to live, and then you're being told, well, this is the American dream, and you say, well, not much of a dream for me. It's more of a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so
you have Mom Donnie that's promising to circuit that.
Yeah.
And just cut rents.
Yeah. Or
cut cost of groceries.
Yes. And so I can see how the younger generation, and I don't know exactly what the solution is because the big beautiful bill, the cuts in the so-called big beautiful bill were actually quite small. They were real cuts, which is different than the past, which is what makes it kind of an exception. It actually does cut some government spending,
right?
Especially in the regulatory world.
As opposed to in the past, they would have a trajectory of growth that was projected. They would reduce the amount of growth, and then the opponents would scream that's been cut.
Yes.
They spend more the year over the last, but it would claim to be a cut.
Yes, but in this one,
is a real cut.
They're real, but they're not big.
They're not big.
But they like 1% or 2%, which is not big, but it is real. But the point is, the angst that we're seeing by the media, by people who disagree with the big beautiful bill over a tiny cut, over a tiny cut shows you how difficult it is to address a problem. So, for example, the younger generation is complaining about the high cost of college. I think the high cost of college is a legitimate issue.
Right.
How do you cut it as long as the government will loan the money so that the colleges can charge the tuition they want to charge?
Right.
How do you cut that? I don't know the answer, but I don't know how to cut that. You can't fix interest rates without growing the economy. Now, I happen to think that interest rates are more of a function, and inflation are more of a function of the speed at which government spending grows. And so I think over the next 24 months, interest rates will subside. I think they may go down in a mortgage, maybe 125 to 150 basis points, which is 1.5%. That's significant. And that'll help.
So let's just slow down a bit for people who are not in the financial world. A basis point is what, a tenth?
A hundredth
of a percent.
So 150 basis points would be 1.5%. Yeah,
right.
Thank you. And so that means a 6.5% mortgage might get down to 5%. Well, that's a big difference between your monthly mortgage payment is going to go down substantially.
Yeah, we did that math in the prior podcast, and your payment would go down maybe a third or something like that.
Yes, it's significant. And so the cost of housing, the cost of buying a home, I think over the next 24 months, housing will become more affordable, not because the price of the house goes down, but because the interest rate on the mortgage will go down.
Right.
But I don't know how to fix health care. I have an idea how to fix it, but this bill doesn't address why health care costs are so high.
Yeah.
And they are being borne by young people. You hear people say, well, young people have to pay a premium. They have to pay these large premiums so that the older people who need health care can have the health care because the older people can't afford it. Well, if I'm younger, I'm saying, wait a minute, if I'm a safe driver, then I'm going to pay a lot lower rate on my car insurance than somebody who gets in wrecks.
Right.
Why shouldn't health care be the same? Why shouldn't me as a healthy person, why shouldn't I get a lower premium? And the answer is that's not how our system works because the government has determined how our system would work, not the market.
Right.
And that's a key.
Yeah, well, the market will price a policy to what your risks are.
Yes.
And when Obamacare came along, they used what they call community rating, which is to mix it all together and say our combined risk across everybody is X, and the young people are going to pay the same as the old people. And the effect is young people are paying your and my medical bills.
Yeah. And so I can see why the youngest generation on our chart is less enthusiastic, less proud to be an American, because they're burdened in so many different ways that the older generations are not.
Well, let's just say it. The market is very good at fixing these kind of problems and cutting costs because every supplier, every businessman wants more business. If he can deliver it cheaper, he will, right? And so the market, in my opinion, would solve this if it were allowed to operate.
Right.
It's the government and the regulations and the obstructions to the marketplace that are causing these excessive costs that are dimming the American dream.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mike, let's just end at this point, but let's pick up at that topic at that point next time, and let's try to bring in the historical part of this, because what you and I are talking about are not new ideas. These are ideas that have been around for a very long time. They're just not being taught. They truly are not being taught.
Yes.
That's part of the problem. And when we come into this world, this is an interesting thing. I loved your metaphor or whatever you're talking about. Sand is not nutritious.
Yes.
No matter what somebody says. When a person is born into this world, their knowledge is zero. They know absolutely nothing. And it's then what they learn and how they apply what they learn that determines what will happen in their life.
So the name of this podcast is From Our Generation, and our idea is that you and I together have roughly a century and a half of experience.
Yeah.
And we've learned some things, and our sense is that young people are not being offered this.
They're not being offered
they're not being educated about what's great about the United States, why it has become the most prosperous and most powerful country ever to exist.
Not what's great about it now, but what made it.
Yes. Well, there's a 250-year history now of why the United States is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think...
And what's the nature of prosperity?
Yeah.
What's the nature of it, and how does a society become more prosperous for the largest number of people possible. That's really what, and that's what the great battle is now.
Yeah. And if you start from the premise that the United States is basically malevolent, that it's rooted in oppression and injustice and the source of a lot of the evil in the world, you're just not going to hear why it's become so successful and how it can be successful again.
Well, and I mean, so anyway, that's where we'll pick up at that point in the next. And what I'd like to do in our next one, which will be a few weeks from now, because you're going to be taking a trip. But we're going to get into and dig into the elements, the specifics of the big beautiful, what is called the big beautiful bill, and what we believe the implications of that will be. But I want us to focus on what we think it means for people who are between 20 and say 30 to 35. That's what I want to be focusing on.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.